His name was Private Daniel Miller, and he was a ghost. Not the kind that haunts old houses, but the kind that haunts a rifle squad in the middle of a war. He was a space that should have been filled by a soldier. Instead, we got him. He arrived with a batch of replacements outside of Aachen, a fresh-faced kid with glasses so thick they made his eyes look like they were swimming. He was carrying a brand-new M1 Garand like it was a bag of groceries he was afraid to drop. In the back of the Deuce and a Half, surrounded by the rest of us, filthy, hollow-eyed men who had been living in the mud for 2 months, he looked like he'd taken a wrong turn on his way to a church picnic. I was Sergeant Frank Riley. They called me Rock. It wasn't a compliment about my strength. It was about my heart. I was 35, which made me an old man in this man's army, and I had been fighting since they landed us in North Africa in '42. I had seen good men die, brave men break, and smart men do stupid things. The one thing I couldn't stomach was a liability. A liability was a man who was going to get himself killed, and worse, get one of my men killed in the process. From the moment I saw Private Miller, all my instincts screamed liability. "Reportin' for duty, Sergeant," he'd said, his voice cracking. He tried to salute, but he was holding his rifle in his right hand, so it turned into a clumsy, awkward wave. Brooklyn, my bar gunner and the squad's resident loudmouth, let out a snort. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph," he muttered. "They sent us a Boy Scout." I just stared at the kid. "Where you from, Miller?" "Ohio, Sergeant. Near Columbus." "You ever shoot a rifle before, Miller?" "Yes, Sergeant. In basic training." That was the worst possible answer. It meant he knew just enough to be dangerous to himself. I looked at his clean uniform, his unscuffed boots, and the hopeful, terrified look in his eyes, and I hated him. I hated him because he was going to force me to care. It was my job to keep these men alive, and this kid looked like he'd have trouble surviving a walk across a busy street, let alone the Hurtgen Forest. The first 24 hours confirmed all my fears. During a routine weapon inspection, he somehow managed to drop his rifle, the M1 clattering onto the frozen ground. The whole squad flinched. You don't drop your rifle. It's your wife, your mother, your God. You sleep with it, you eat with it, you die with it. Dropping it was like a priest dropping the cross. A bad omen. Later that day, a single German 88 shell screamed in and landed 100 yards away. It was a random, speculative shot, more to harass us than anything. But to a new kid, every shell sounds like it has your name on it. We all hit the dirt instinctively. All of us except Miller. He just stood there, frozen, his mouth open, staring at the cloud of black smoke. I had to run out, grab him by the collar, and drag him into a ditch, screaming curses in his ear the whole time. "You freeze like that again, you're dead." I roared, my face an inch from his. "You understand me? You are a walking ghost, kid. You are already dead if you don't wise up." He just stared at me, his face pale, and nodded. He didn't say a word. That was almost worse. I wanted him to yell back, to show some fire, some sign that there was a soldier buried somewhere inside that clumsy farm boy's body. But there was nothing. Just a quiet, bottomless well of fear. His unique skill, if you could call it that, was a kind of spectacular incompetence. He couldn't dig a proper foxhole to save his life. His were always too shallow, too wide, more of a bathtub than a fighting position. We had to teach him how to use an entrenching tool 3 times. In his first firefight, a minor skirmish with a German patrol, he expended an entire 8-round clip of 30-06 firing at a target that was at least 500 yards away, kicking up dirt 100 yards short. He was a terrible shot. Truly, magnificently awful. It was like he was just making noise to scare the Germans away. The other men in the squad, veterans like Gallo, Tex, and Brooklyn, they weren't cruel to him, not at first. They just ignored him. He was a non-entity, a piece of equipment they had to account for. He tried to make friends, asking stupid questions about where they were from or what they did before the war. They'd give him short, one-word answers and turn away. In a combat unit, you don't invest in a man until you're sure he's going to be around for a while. No one was taking bets on Private Miller lasting the week. My own interactions with him were brutal and direct. I put him on every miserable detail I could think of. Latrine duty, hauling water, cleaning the machine gun. I rode him harder than any recruit I'd ever had. I was trying to break him, to either forge him into something useful or send him running to the medics with a case of combat exhaustion. In my mind, I was doing him a favor. A soft hand would get him killed. A hard hand might just scare him into staying alive. But nothing worked. He just took the abuse, his face set in a quiet, miserable mask, and kept on failing. He was an anchor, a weight that was going to drag the whole squad down into the mud with him. And I was the one who was going to have to cut the rope. The order came down on a Tuesday morning, a day so cold and gray that the sky and the mud seemed to blend together. Lieutenant Patterson, a fresh-faced West Pointer who still believed the maps he carried told the truth, called me over to his command post, a fancy name for a slightly deeper hole in the ground. "Top says we're pushing, Rock," he said, tapping a grease pencil on a plastic-covered map. The map was clean. The real world, just outside the hole, was not. "See this? Hill 382. Jerry's got an observation post up there, at least one machine gun nest. It's giving our artillery hell. We gotta take it out. First platoon will make the main assault from the west. He circled a long, wooded draw on the map, are going to provide a demonstration on the southern approach. Draw their fire, fix them in place." A demonstration. I hated that word. It was officer speak for get shot at so someone else can do the real work. It was a suicide mission dressed up in a clean uniform. The southern approach was a death trap, a steep, wooded slope with no cover. "Yes, sir," I said, my face a mask of stone. "When do we move out?" "Dawn tomorrow." "And Rock," he added, looking at me with that earnest, collegiate sincerity. "I need eyes on that ridge to the east of the hill. It's marked as impassable on the map, but if Jerry has a flanking position up there, it could chew first platoon to pieces. I need a man up there. An observer, just to be sure." An idea, cold and ugly, began to form in my mind. A way to solve two problems at once. A way to protect my real soldiers and cut the anchor loose. "I've got just the man, sir," I said. I walked back to the squad's position, my boots squelching in the half-frozen mud. The men were huddled in their foxholes, trying to stay warm, their breath pluming in the frigid air. I saw Miller, sitting by himself, trying to clean his rifle for what must have been the 10th time that day. He was still doing it wrong. I stood over him, a dark shadow against the gray sky. "Miller, on your feet." He scrambled up, knocking over a can of oil. He looked at me, his eyes wide with that familiar, hunted look. "You see that ridge?" I said, pointing to the dark, pine-covered spine of rock that loomed over us to the east. It was a sheer, ugly cliff, a place where only a goat would feel at home. "At 0500 hours, you're going to take a field phone, a spool of wire, and you're going to climb it. You'll find a spot with a good view of that hill over there, and you will report everything you see. Everything. You got that?" He stared at the ridge, then back at me. I could see the terror in his eyes. He knew what I was asking. It was a one-man mission away from the squad, into the dark. It was a death sentence. "But, Sergeant," he stammered. "The lieutenant's map, it says that ridge is—" "I don't give a damn what the map says." I snapped, my voice like the crack of a whip. "I'm giving you an order, Private. You will climb that ridge. You will establish an observation post. And you will not call us on that phone unless you see an entire German panzer division coming over that hill. Is that clear?" The other men were watching now, their faces grim. They knew what this was. They had seen it before. The sergeant, getting rid of a problem. It was a cruel but necessary part of the war's brutal calculus. You sacrifice the weak to save the strong. Miller's shoulders slumped. The fight, if there had ever been any, went out of him. "Yes, Sergeant," he whispered. "Good," I said, turning my back on him. I felt a dozen pairs of eyes on me, some accusing, some understanding. I didn't care. I walked over to the rest of the squad. "All right, you heard the lieutenant. We're going on a little walk tomorrow. Check your gear. Get some sleep." I didn't look at Miller again. In my mind, he was already gone. I was sending him up that ridge not because I thought he would succeed, but because I knew he would fail. He'd get lost. He'd fall. He'd get picked off by a sniper. Whatever happened, he would be out of my way. He wouldn't be there to freeze under fire, to waste ammunition, to get one of my good men killed. As I settled into my own foxhole that night, the cold seeping into my bones, I felt a pang of something that might have been guilt. I was sending a boy to die, but I pushed the feeling away. This was war, not a Sunday school picnic. Patton himself said it. The object of war is not to die for your country, but to make the other bastard die for his. I was just helping Miller avoid the first part by removing him from the equation. In a twisted way, I told myself, I was probably saving his life by taking him out of the main fight. It was a lie, but it was a lie that helped me sleep. I turned my back to the dark ridge and dreamed of home, a place where boys like Daniel Miller could live long enough to become men. The draw leading up to Hill 382 was a place made of shadows and fear. The trees were so thick that they formed a solid canopy, a green roof that turned the morning into a perpetual twilight. The ground was soft and slick with a carpet of rotting pine needles that muffled our footsteps, but it also hid a treacherous web of roots and rocks. Every snap of a twig, every dislodged stone, sounded like a gunshot in the oppressive silence. We moved like phantoms, 12 men against a forest that felt alive and malevolent. I had Gallo and his fire team on point, moving in short, careful bounds. I was 5 yards behind him with Brooklyn and the rest of the squad. Tex was somewhere behind us, a ghost with a sniper rifle, finding his own path. My senses were screaming. Every nerve ending was on fire. I scanned the trees, the undergrowth, the dark spaces between the rocks. I was looking for the unnatural line, the patch of ground that was too flat, the shadow that was too deep. This was the hunter's art, and out here, we were all hunters. And we were all the hunted. The air was cold and damp, heavy with the smell of wet earth and decay. It was the smell of the Hurtgen, the smell of death. For the first 200 yards, nothing. The silence was absolute. Too absolute. It was a listening silence, the kind that comes before an ambush. I could feel the crosshairs on my back. I glanced at Gallo. He felt it too. He gave me a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. This is wrong. I knew. But orders were orders. Somewhere, miles behind us, a general named Eisenhower was moving flags on a map. We were one of those flags. Our job was to move forward until we couldn't move anymore. Keep it slow. I whispered into the hand radio, the words barely a breath. Something ain't right. Then we saw it. Through a break in the trees, about 100 yards up the slope. A low, ugly mound of earth and logs, with a dark slit in the front. The machine gun nest from the map. It was exactly where they said it would be. It looked quiet, dormant. There was no sign of movement. I see it. Gallo's voice crackled in my ear. Looks quiet. Too quiet. They're waiting for us to get into the open, I whispered back. Brooklyn, you see a lane? Brooklyn grunted. He had shifted his position, his bar resting on a moss-covered log. Got one. Left of the big pine. I can lay it right on their doorstep. Good. On my signal, you give him a full magazine. Suppress the hell out of him. Gallo, the second he opens up, you move. Straight for the bunker. Use the dead ground to the right. Go. It was textbook. The simple, brutal ballet of fire and maneuver. I took a deep breath, the cold air burning my lungs. Do it. The world exploded in sound. Brooklyn's bar roared to life, the heavy 30-06 rounds ripping through the air with a sound like a buzzsaw hitting concrete. He chewed up the front of the bunker, sending splinters and dirt flying. As soon as he started, Gallo and his team were up and running, low and fast, charging up the slope. The rest of us laid down a storm of covering fire, the sharp crack of our Garens echoing through the forest. The distinctive ping of an empty clip being ejected was the rhythm of our attack. For a moment, it seemed to be working. The German bunker didn't respond. Not a single shot. Gallo's team reached the edge of the clearing in front of the nest and went to ground, throwing grenades. Too quick, hard explosions. Whump, whump. Smoke billowed from the firing slit. We're on it. Gallo yelled, his voice tight with adrenaline. Moving in, he and his men charged the last 20 yards and disappeared inside the smoke. A moment of tense silence, then a few muffled shots from inside. Then, Gallo's voice, clear and triumphant. It's clear. Position taken. 2 Krauts, both dead. We're in. A wave of relief washed over me. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Maybe intel was right for once. Maybe it really was just a single, lightly defended position. The guys started to move up, a little more relaxed now, a few of them grinning. We'd done it. We'd taken the objective. And that's when the world ended. It started with the sound I heard in my nightmares. The sound of a giant tearing a sheet of canvas. Brr-rip. From our right flank. From a place we hadn't even been looking. A second MG-42, perfectly concealed in a spider hole on a little knob of land that wasn't even on the map, opened up. It was a perfect enfilade. It caught the whole squad in the open as we were moving up to the bunker. The air was filled with a solid wall of lead. I saw a young private from the 2nd Fire Team, a kid named Peterson, get hit. He didn't scream. He just spun around like a broken toy and fell, his helmet bouncing off a rock with a dull clang. Down! Get down! I roared, diving behind a massive fallen oak tree. The bark next to my head exploded into a spray of splinters. The gunner was a professional. He was traversing, spraying the whole area, pinning every single one of us. We were completely, utterly exposed. The bunker Gallo had taken wasn't the objective. It was the bait. It was a sacrificial position, designed to draw us into a perfectly prepared kill zone. And we had walked right into it, like lambs to the slaughter. Then the mortars started. Not the random, probing fire from the day before. This was a storm. They knew exactly where we were. The shells rained down, screaming, one after another, turning our little patch of forest into a volcano. The tree bursts were horrific, spraying a curtain of white-hot shrapnel down on us. I heard men screaming, high, terrified sounds that were quickly cut off. Get back, I yelled, knowing it was useless. The machine gun had our line of retreat completely locked down. We couldn't go forward. We couldn't go back. We were trapped. A shell landed so close that the concussion lifted me off the ground and slammed me back down. My ears rang, and for a second, the world went gray. I shook my head, trying to clear it, and tasted blood. I'd bitten my tongue. I risked a look over the log. It was chaos. Men were crawling, trying to find any cover they could. Doc, our medic, was already out there, low-crawling towards a man who was writhing on the ground, his leg a bloody mess. Rock, to the left. It was Brooklyn's voice. I looked and saw what he saw. A flicker of movement. Another German squad, working their way through the trees, coming to finish us off while we were pinned. This wasn't a defense. This was an annihilation. A carefully planned, perfectly executed trap. Somewhere, a German officer was looking at a map identical to ours, and he was smiling. He knew this forest. He knew how we thought, and he had built a better mousetrap. Womp boom. A new sound. Deeper, heavier. I looked down the slope, back the way we'd come. The Sherman tank that was supposed to be our support, the one we called Kentucky Windage, was trying to move up the draw to help us. It was a foolish, brave move. As it nosed around a bend, a figure darted out from behind a rock, a long tube on his shoulder. Panzerfaust. A streak of fire shot across the draw. It hit the Sherman just below the turret. There was a dull clang, and for a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, a jet of orange flame shot out of the driver's hatch. A split second later, the whole tank went up with a deafening roar that shook the trees. The turret blew off and sailed 50 feet into the air, tumbling end over end, before crashing down into the forest. Black, greasy smoke billowed into the sky. Our support was gone. Our ride home was a funeral pyre. The psychological blow was devastating. A tank is more than a weapon. It's a symbol. It's a steel monster that's on your side. Seeing it die so easily, it broke something inside you. I saw the look on the faces of my men. The hope was gone, replaced by a dull, hollow-eyed despair. The radio. I yelled at my radio man, a kid named Goldstein. Get me Captain Miller. Tell him we're in a trap. We're being cut to pieces. Goldstein was huddled behind a rock, the heavy SCR-300 on his back. He fumbled with the handset, his hands shaking. I'm trying, Sarge. I can't get through. It's all static. Just then, a mortar shell landed 5 feet from his position. The explosion threw him sideways. I saw the radio on his back shatter into 1,000 pieces, the delicate vacuum tubes and wires spilling out like metallic guts. Goldstein screamed, clutching his arm where a piece of shrapnel had torn through his sleeve. Our last link to the outside world was gone. We were alone, completely and utterly alone. The battle dissolved into a series of disconnected, nightmarish moments. I saw Tex, my cool-headed sniper, frantically firing his Springfield, not at distant targets, but at the German infantry who were now less than 50 yards away. He was working the bolt with a machine-like precision, but there were too many of them. I saw Gallo, trapped in the decoy bunker, firing his Thompson out of a side slit, trying to provide some covering fire, but he was as pinned as we were. Brooklyn was my rock. He had found a sliver of cover behind the root ball of a fallen tree and was firing his bar in short, controlled bursts. He was the only thing stopping the Germans on the left from overrunning us completely. He was drawing a terrifying amount of fire. The ground around him was being chewed to pieces. "I'm running low, Rock," he yelled over the din. "One more magazine." "Conserve it," I screamed back. "Make M count." We were dying, piece by piece. The carefully constructed organism of a rifle squad was being dismembered. I tried to organize a breakout, a desperate charge back the way we came, but the MG-42 had it sewn up tight. No one could move more than a few feet without drawing a storm of fire. My mind was racing, trying to find an angle, a solution, a plan. But there was nothing. No smart plays left. We were outmaneuvered, outgunned, and outnumbered. I lay there, the smell of cordite and blood thick in my nostrils, and I felt a kind of cold, clear despair settle over me. I thought of the lieutenant's map, the neat little symbols, the clean, confident lines. It was all a lie. War wasn't fought on maps. It was fought here, in the mud and the blood, where plans fell apart, and all you had left was the man next to you and the fear in your gut. I thought about my men. Gallo, the steady one. Brooklyn, the loudmouth with the heart of a lion. Tex, the quiet killer. These were my guys. My responsibility. And I had led them here. I had followed the orders. I had walked the flag across the map, and I had led them into this meat grinder. The weight of it was crushing. In the midst of the chaos, the noise, the screaming, and the dying, I never once thought of Private Miller. He didn't exist. He was a ghost, a bad memory from another lifetime. The boy I had sent off on a suicide mission was the furthest thing from my mind. He was a calculated loss, a piece I had sacrificed early in the game. Now, the rest of the board was on fire, and the game was almost over. My world had shrunk to this single, desperate patch of ground. My only concern was the men dying around me, the dwindling ammunition in my pouches, and the gray-clad figures that were now massing in the trees for the final attack. They were getting ready to come in and finish the job. I checked the magazine in my Thompson. Maybe 10 rounds left. I took a grenade from my belt, feeling its familiar, heavy weight in my hand. It wasn't enough. It wasn't nearly enough. The trap had closed, and we were inside. Time ceases to exist in a kill zone. There are no seconds, no minutes. There is only the frantic, blood-slick space between one heartbeat and the next. I lay behind that fallen oak, the rough bark digging into my cheek, and I prepared to die. The cold clarity of despair was a strange kind of comfort. There were no more decisions to make, no more tactics to consider. The map was gone. The plan was a bad joke. All that was left was the final, ugly equation of steel and flesh. Across the mangled stretch of ground, the Germans were getting ready. I could see the Feldwebel, their NCO, a thick, bull-necked man with a face like a slab of raw meat, waving his men forward. They were moving with the calm, unhurried confidence of predators who have their prey cornered and bleeding. They weren't charging. They were advancing, a methodical, gray wave of men and steel, ready to wash over our position and scrub it clean. "Last magazine, Rock," Brooklyn grunted from his position. His voice was ragged, stripped of its usual bravado. He was down to his last 20 rounds. "Make him count," I said. The words tasted like ash. I could hear the metallic click of Tex working the bolt on his Springfield. He wasn't a sniper anymore. He was just a rifleman, firing as fast as he could into the advancing line. Beside me, a private I barely knew was whispering a prayer, his rosary beads tangled in his filthy fingers. I didn't tell him to stop. Whatever gets you through the last 30 seconds. The German NCO raised his arm, ready to give the final signal. The MG-42 on our flank hammered out a long, terrifying burst, chewing up the ground in front of us, forcing our heads down for the final rush. This was it, the end of the line. I tightened my grip on my Thompson, ready to stand up and empty the last of my magazine. If I was going to die, I was going to die on my feet. And then, something impossible happened. The German NCO's head snapped back with a wet, explosive sound. His helmet flew off, and he crumpled to the ground like a puppet with its strings cut. For a half-second, no one reacted. Then I heard it, a deep, heavy boom that was completely different from the sharp crack of the German Mausers. It was the voice of an M1 Garand, and it had come from the wrong direction. It came from somewhere behind the German lines. From the south, from the direction of the high, impassable ridge. The advancing Germans stopped. They looked at their fallen leader, then looked back into the forest behind them, their faces a mixture of shock and confusion. Before any of them could react, it happened again. Another boom. Another German spun and fell, clutching his chest. What in the hell was going on? My mind struggled to process the information. It had to be an echo, a trick of the sound, bouncing off the dense trees. It had to be. There was no one on that ridge. It was a ghost, a phantom. But the Germans didn't think it was an echo. They were yelling now, shouting orders in that guttural, angry language. The MG-42, the beast that had been tearing us to pieces, suddenly stopped firing at us. The gunner traversed the heavy weapon around, pointing it up towards the high ridge, and let loose a long, searching burst, spraying the treetops with a blind, furious rage. He was shooting at nothing, at a ghost. But the fact that he was shooting at all meant the threat was real. The pressure on us vanished. It was like a physical weight being lifted off my chest. I could breathe again. What is that? What the hell is that? Brooklyn yelled, his voice a mix of awe and disbelief. Shut up and shoot. I roared back, my mind starting to work again, the cold despair being replaced by a frantic, desperate spark of hope. They're distracted. Fire, you sons of bitches. Fire. It was the chance we needed. The slimmest, most impossible sliver of a chance. While the Germans were looking over their shoulders, we opened up with everything we had left. Brooklyn's last 20 rounds ripped into their disorganized flank. Tex, no longer firing frantically, took a half-second to aim and dropped another German who was trying to take cover. I fired a short, controlled burst from my Thompson, forcing their point man to dive for cover. The momentum of the battle had shifted in the space of 3 rifle shots. The German assault hadn't just stalled. It had been thrown into complete chaos. They were caught in a crossfire. A real one. They were taking fire from us in the front, and from this invisible, deadly shooter on the high ground behind them. Then the impossible happened again. As the German squad tried to regroup, something small and dark sailed through the air in a high, graceful arc. It came from the ridge, a throw that had to have been 100 yards. Easy. It landed with a soft thud right in the middle of the huddled Germans. An American Mk2 pineapple grenade. I watched it mesmerized. It was a perfect throw. A pitcher's throw. It rolled for a second, and then the world dissolved into smoke, flame, and screaming men. The grenade eviscerated the core of their assault squad. The survivors, panicked and bleeding, broke and ran, melting back into the relative safety of the trees. The immediate threat was gone. Just like that. Vanished in a puff of smoke and a few well-aimed shots from a ghost I couldn't see. My mind was reeling. Who was up there? It couldn't be another American unit. We were miles ahead of the main line. Command would have told us if another platoon was operating in this sector. It had to be a lost patrol, maybe some paratroopers from the 82nd who'd been scattered and were fighting their way out. But what were they doing on a ridge that was marked as impassable? The mortar fire that had been pounding us had stopped. The Germans were redirecting their resources. I could hear their NCOs shouting, and I saw a squad of about 10 men detach from their main line and start scrambling up the steep slope of the ridge, firing their rifles into the trees as they went. They were going to hunt the ghost. This was our breathing room, the break we needed. Doc, I yelled. Get to the wounded. Now. Goldstein, how's the arm? Our radio man was pale, but he gave me a weak thumbs up. The shrapnel had torn his flesh, but the bone was intact. Doc, our medic, was already moving, a real angel of mercy in the middle of this hell, crawling from man to man, applying pressure bandages, handing out syrettes of morphine. Gallo, you still with me? I shouted towards the decoy bunker. Still here, Rock. His voice came back, strained but strong. What in God's name is happening? No idea, but we're going to use it. Status. We're good. Pinned, but we're good. All right. Everybody listen up. I roared, crawling from position to position. I was the sergeant again, not a man waiting to die. Consolidate. Redistribute ammo. Check your fields of fire. They're coming back. The men responded instantly. The hollow-eyed despair was gone, replaced by the grim, focused energy of soldiers who had been given a second chance. They started passing clips of ammo to Brooklyn for his bar. They dragged the wounded into better cover. They reinforced their positions with fallen logs and loose rocks. We were turning our little piece of the kill zone into a fortress. All the while, a fierce, separate battle was raging on the ridge to our south. We could hear the crack of the Garand, slow and methodical, answered by the frantic, rapid-fire chatter of German MP-40 submachine guns and Kar-98 rifles. It was 1 man against 10. The odds were impossible, but the Ghost was holding his own. We'd see a German soldier climbing the ridge, and then he'd suddenly drop and roll back down. The Ghost was using the terrain, moving, firing from different positions. He was fighting smart. Tex had his scope trained on the ridge. "I can't see him, Rock," he said, his voice filled with professional admiration. "Whoever he is, he's good. He moves like smoke. But I see them. The Krauts are getting torn up." The German commander was in a dilemma. His carefully laid trap had been turned on its head. He still had us pinned, but he couldn't commit to his final assault while this Phantom was chewing up his rear. And he couldn't ignore us to deal with the Phantom, because we'd tear him apart from the other side. He was caught. The lull lasted for maybe 20 minutes. It was the most precious 20 minutes of my life. We got our wounded stabilized. We drank from our canteens. We reloaded every magazine, every clip. We were still in a terrible position, still outnumbered and cut off, but we weren't dead. We were back in the fight. And it was all because of the Ghost on the ridge. I found myself staring up at that dark spine of rock, my mind racing. Who was he? Some battle-crazed paratrooper who'd been living in these woods for weeks? A scout from another company who had gotten lost and stumbled into our fight? Every logical explanation seemed unlikely. It felt like a miracle. And I didn't believe in miracles. Not in the Hurtgen Forest. Miracles didn't happen here. The sounds of the firefight on the ridge were starting to change. The single, methodical boom of the Garand was becoming less frequent. The German fire was intensifying. They were closing in on him. Whoever he was running out of time. And I knew, with a sinking feeling in my gut, that when they finally silenced the Ghost, that entire German force would turn its full, undivided attention back to us. "He's in trouble, Rock," Tex said, his eyes still pressed to his scope. "They're pinning him down." I knew, but there was nothing I could do. The ridge was too far, and the German main line was still squarely between us and him. We couldn't help him any more than he could help us, not directly. He had bought us time, a second chance. Now it was up to us to use it. I crawled over to Brooklyn's position. "How we doing, Brooke?" He patted the fresh magazines laid out beside him. "Ready for round 2, Sarge." The fear was gone from his eyes, replaced by a hard, familiar light. He was a fighter again. "Just tell me who to thank when we get out of this." I looked back towards the ridge, where the sounds of battle were growing more desperate. "I have no idea," I said, and it was the honest-to-God truth. In all that time, in all that chaos and sudden hope, in all my frantic calculations and tactical adjustments, not once, not for a single, fleeting second, did the thought of Private Daniel Miller cross my mind. He was a ghost of a different kind, a memory I had already buried. He was the clumsy kid from Ohio who couldn't dig a foxhole or clean his rifle. He was the burden I had sent away to die so the rest of us could live. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't a phantom marksman or a ghost on a ridge. He was just gone, and I had more important things to worry about. I had a squad to lead. I had a battle to win. And I had a debt to pay to the anonymous stranger on the high ground who had just saved all our lives. The silence that followed the fight on the ridge was worse than the noise. It was a heavy, listening silence, full of menace. The Ghost was gone. The single, defiant boom of his Garand was no more, swallowed by the forest. The frantic chatter of the German submachine guns had sputtered out. Up on that dark spine of rock, the battle was over. And we knew who had won. A cold dread, more profound than the earlier despair, began to seep back into our position. The miracle was over. The brief, impossible reprieve had been revoked. We had been given a second chance, and now it was being taken away. I could feel the collective gaze of the German force reorienting, turning back towards us like a single, malevolent eye. They had dealt with the nuisance in their rear. Now they could get back to the main event, our annihilation. "They're coming, Rock." Gallo's voice crackled over the radio from the decoy bunker. "I see movement all along the line. They're forming up again." "I see 'em," I said, my voice a low growl. "Everybody hold your fire. Not one shot until they're in the open. Brooklyn, short bursts only. Make every damn bullet buy us a second." The men were ready. The 20-minute lull had transformed them. They were no longer panicked victims in a trap. They were cornered wolves, ready to fight to the last. The ground was littered with spent brass and empty clips. The air was thick with the coppery smell of blood and the stink of cordite. We had maybe 5 minutes of fight left in us before the ammunition ran out. After that, it would be bayonets and trench knives. A messy, ugly end in the German mud of 1944. The first thing we heard was the engine. It was a low, rumbling growl that vibrated up through the soles of my boots. It was a sound that turned my blood to ice. It wasn't a truck. It was the distinctive, grinding clatter of steel treads on rock and mud, accompanied by the deep, throaty roar of a Maybach engine. Panzer, Tex breathed from his position, his voice tight with a kind of reverent horror. That's a big cat. A panther, maybe. It came into view a moment later, nosing around the burning hulk of our dead Sherman. It was a monster. A Panzer V, the Panther. It was a sleek, sloped beast of a machine, its long 75mm cannon sniffing the air like the snout of some prehistoric predator. It was, pound for pound, the best tank on the battlefield, and we had nothing to stop it. A bazooka round might bounce off its frontal armor. A grenade would be like throwing a rock at a battleship. The tank moved with a terrifying, inexorable grace. It ignored the decoy bunker where Gallo was hiding. It knew where the real threat was. It lumbered up the draw, its cannon and coaxial MG-42 pointed directly at the fallen oak tree that served as the heart of our defense. It was coming for me. The German infantry advanced behind it, using the 45-ton tank as a moving shield. They were confident now, their earlier panic erased by the presence of this steel god. This was the end. The final, crushing move in their perfect trap. "All right," I said, my voice strangely calm. I felt my own heartbeat, slow and steady. "This is it. When it gets to that clearing, we give it everything we've got. Aim for the treads, the vision slits. Blind it. Slow it down. It won't kill it, but it might piss him off." The men didn't answer. They just sighted down their rifles. What could they say? We all knew the score. The Panther reached the edge of the clearing, 50 yards away. It stopped. The turret began to turn with a low, hydraulic whine. It was looking for a target. The long barrel swung past Brooklyn's position, past Tex, and then it settled, pointing directly at me. I stared down the black, unblinking eye of the cannon, and I knew my time was up. I had lived a hard life, and this was going to be a hard death. It seemed fitting. I was about to give the order to fire, to go down in a final, pointless blaze of defiance, when I saw it. A flicker of movement in the ditch on the right side of the draw. A shadow detaching itself from the other shadows. It was so fast, so subtle, that I thought I was imagining things. The Panther's main gun fired. The world erupted in a cataclysm of sound and fury. The shell screamed over my head and hit the earth 20 feet behind me, detonating with a force that felt like the fist of God. It blew a crater 10 feet wide and showered our position with dirt and rock. My ears were ringing, but I was alive. He'd missed. Before the tank's machine gun could open up, before the German infantry could charge, the shadow in the ditch moved again. An arm, thin and wiry, swung over in a perfect, fluid motion. The kind of motion you see from a shortstop turning a double play. Something small and dark flew through the air. It wasn't a grenade. It was a sticky bomb, a British anti-tank weapon that was little more than a glass flask full of nitroglycerin covered in a powerful adhesive, all housed in a sheet metal casing. We'd been issued a few, but they were notoriously unreliable and dangerous to the user. You had to get terrifyingly close to use one. The bomb sailed through the air, a perfect spiral. It wasn't aimed at the thick frontal armor. It was aimed at the rear of the tank, at the engine deck. It flew over the turret and landed with a soft thwack right on top of the engine's air intake grill. For a second, nothing happened. The German infantrymen, who hadn't even seen the throw, continued their advance. The tank commander, probably annoyed that his gunner had missed an easy shot, was likely barking orders inside the steel coffin. Then, a bright flash and a sharp, cracking explosion. It wasn't a big blast, not like the main gun, but it was precise. A thick, black plume of oily smoke erupted from the rear of the Panther. The engine coughed, sputtered, and died with a horrible, grinding screech. The beast was wounded. Immobilized. The top hatch flew open, and the German commander, his face black with soot, tried to scramble out. The single, heavy boom of a Garand echoed from the ditch, and the commander fell back inside. The side hatches opened, and the rest of the crew tried to bail out. They were met with a hail of 30-06 rounds from the Ghost in the ditch. The rifle wasn't firing wildly. Each shot was deliberate. A miss, another miss, then a hit, then another miss. It was terrible shooting, but it was effective enough. The crew was cut down before they could take 10 steps. The tank was dead, a silent, smoking monument to failure. The German infantry, who had been marching forward with such confidence just moments before, stopped dead in their tracks. Their shield was gone. Their god was dead. They stared at the smoking tank, then at the ditch, their discipline shattering. And out of that ditch, a figure rose. He was covered in mud and filth from head to toe. His uniform was torn, and there was a dark, bloody gash on his forehead. He was stooped under the weight of an empty field phone case and a spool of wire. He held an M1 Garand in his hands, as if it were a foreign object. He stumbled out of the ditch and started walking towards us, a lonely, shambling figure in a landscape of death. The entire battlefield fell silent. My men, the Germans, we all just stared. It was like watching a man walk out of his own grave. It was Private Miller. The German infantry, their morale broken, had seen enough. They weren't soldiers anymore. They were just men who wanted to live. They turned and fled, melting back into the woods, leaving their dead and their crippled tank behind. They had no idea who this apparition was, but they weren't staying to find out. Miller kept walking, stumbling over the broken ground, his eyes fixed on me. The rest of my squad slowly rose from their positions, their weapons held loosely, their faces a mask of utter, uncomprehending shock. Brooklyn's jaw was literally hanging open. Tex had lowered his rifle and was just staring, shaking his head slowly. Miller finally reached our line. He stumbled past the fallen oak tree and stopped 5 feet in front of me. He was breathing in ragged, painful gasps. His face was a pale, mud-streaked mess, but his eyes were clear. The fear was gone. I had seen that kind of look before. It was the 1,000-yard stare. The look of a man who has been to the other side and back. He straightened up, trying to bring his heels together in a pathetic attempt at attention. He opened his mouth, and his voice came out as a dry, cracked whisper. "Sergeant," he said, and he had to stop to swallow. "Reporting as ordered, Sergeant." He took another shuddering breath. "The ridge is clear. Enemy observation post neutralized. I encountered some resistance." He gestured vaguely with his rifle towards the smoking panther. "Saw an enemy tank advancing on your position, so I took care of it. Threat eliminated. The enemy appears to be in full retreat." He said it all in a flat monotone, like a boy reciting a lesson. He had done what I had ordered him to do. He had observed, and he had reported. I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the empty pouches on his belt where his grenades should have been. I saw the burns on his hands, probably from priming that damn sticky bomb. I saw the empty clips at his feet, and I finally understood. The Ghost on the ridge hadn't been a marksman. He was a boy with a golden arm and a rifle he couldn't hit a thing with. He had crawled up to that ridge, seen the whole trap laid out beneath him, and realized he was the only one who could do anything about it. He couldn't shoot them, so he had started throwing grenades. 100-yard throw, across a valley, into a machine gun nest. It was impossible, but he had done it. He had fought off a 10-man German patrol with a rifle he couldn't aim and a courage I couldn't comprehend. Then he had crawled back down, seen the tank, and done the only thing he could think of. He had used his unique, God-given talent to save us all. He was a terrible soldier, but he was one hell of a baseball player. The whole squad was watching us, waiting to see what I would do, waiting to hear what I would say. I opened my mouth. I was going to curse him out. I was going to call him a lucky son of a bitch. I was going to say something mean and sarcastic, because that's who I was. That was my armor. But the words wouldn't come. I looked at this filthy, bleeding, exhausted boy who had single-handedly broken a German assault, and all my anger, all my contempt, all my bitterness, it just evaporated. It left me hollow. I looked him in the eye, and I gave him a single, short, sharp nod. It was all I had. It was everything. A wave of relief washed over Miller's face that was so profound it was heartbreaking. His shoulders slumped. The rifle slipped from his grasp and clattered to the ground. His eyes rolled back in his head, and he collapsed in a heap at my feet, the war finally catching up with him. Later that night, what was left of us gathered in a captured German trench. The battle was over. Reinforcements had finally arrived, drawn by the pillar of smoke from the dead panther. We had 7 wounded and 4 dead. We had won the hill, but the cost, as always, was obscene. Miller was sitting by himself at the far end of the trench, away from the low murmur of the other survivors. Doc had patched up his head and his hands. He was just sitting there, staring into the darkness, his rifle across his knees. He was cleaning it. Properly this time. I watched him for a long time. Then I got up and walked over. The other men fell silent, watching me go. I sat down on the muddy fire step next to him. We sat in silence for a full minute, just the two of us, surrounded by the ghosts of the forest. Finally, I unscrewed the cap from my canteen. I took a short swig. It was whiskey, not water. My last reserve. I held it out to him. "Here, kid," I said, my voice rough. "You earned it." He looked at the canteen, then at me. His eyes were hesitant. Then, he reached out and took it. He took a small, cautious sip, and then a deeper one, the raw liquor making him cough. He handed it back to me. "Thank you, Sergeant," he whispered. I took the canteen, screwed the cap back on, and stared out at the shattered trees. "My name's Frank," I said. "Call me Rock." He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. I took another look at him. The clumsy farm boy from Ohio was gone. In his place sat a soldier. One of my men. He was quiet, and he was still a terrible shot. But he was one of us now. He had found his place in the mud and the blood and the brotherhood. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I would follow him into hell. And he would do the same for me.